One of the things we heard at the marriage retreat was this, your spouse is not your enemy. Last year for the first time we went, we heard that and we like, that's kind of interesting. Your spouse is not your enemy. So that's what our show is going to be about today. We kind of took that and made something out of it. One of the biggest things we have learned from the um, past year, from our marriage conferences, our devotionals, and listening to marriage podcasts is just one thing. You know what that is?
Your spouse is not your enemy.
That's right. Surprisingly, but many married couples don't understand this. And they may not intentionally, say, she's my enemy. But sometimes they act like they're enemies, whether they do it intentionally or if they really even realize it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So stay tuned. All right, we have a script. We kind of have bullet points that we're going to go by, but I'm going to put you on the spot right away. This ain't on the script.
No.
So you're not going to hit it. So when I say your spouse is not your enemy, what's the first thing that comes to your
mind? When you're having a disagreement or an argument or something, conflict of some kind, that you shouldn't be who I'm angry with. You shouldn't be who I'm mad at. There is an underlying problem that is an unseen enemy.
Do you think that the concept of your spouse being your enemy or you're in contention with your spouse, do you think that's a something that happens at an instant, or is that an ongoing thing?
I think it could be either one. It could be something that gradually happens, or it could be something that happens in the moment because maybe you're upset or angry about something. But in the moment when you're in your conflict or your disagreement or whatever it is, I think it's a good reminder to tell yourself your spouse is not your enemy.
Right. Okay. So I'm Joey.
I'm Lori.
And we are Christ-Centered Marriage and Family. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the concept of your spouse being your enemy. But your spouse is not your enemy. That's what we learned. We learned that. We heard that last year at the Weekend to Remember by Family Life. And we went about a month ago in Branson. Awesome time. If you've never been to a Family Life sponsored Weekend to Remember, check it out. Get on the website, Family Life, and see if there's one in your area. It's awesome. One of the things we heard several times was your spouse is not your enemy. And I'm like, that's interesting. That's something that all married couples need to come to grips with. Right, so here we go. So how do husbands and wives become enemies in their marriage? We're going to look at that today. No one starts off thinking, this woman who I want to marry, she is the best thing ever, but one day we're going to be enemies. Mm-hmm. Nobody thinks that. Who thinks that?
No.
Yeah.
So this type of attitude happens when husbands and wives don't prioritize their marriage, or they don't work intentionally together to make sure they don't drift apart. They're intentionally working on creating oneness, and so if we don't do anything and we just go through the motions, you're going to drift apart. You have to be intentional about creating that oneness and keeping your marriage in a good.
So we're going to try in this episode to just lay out the case of what it looks like when spouses become enemies and how you can probably work to avoid that and create that oneness. Mm-hmm. The oneness. And when we get to it, I'm going to let her talk. She's good at describing the oneness better than me. So, okay, Lori, get us started.
When a man and woman get married, whether old or young, they envision a loving, caring relationship. In the early years of marriage, most consider their spouse as their best friend. But as life sets in, husband and wives, we drift apart. We have jobs, we have kids, and everyday things, and you just kind of get into a routine and slowly drift apart. So as he's mentioned, we've been to this marriage conference twice now in the last year or so. So something we learned is when you don't do anything, you drift apart. like a boat, just out in
Doing
the
your own
ocean,
things.
just drift apart. So as husbands and wives slowly drift apart, maybe not even realizing it, they can act as if they're enemies. Some in marriages live as if they are two different people sharing the same space, like your roommates. If you're not intentional in making your marriage work, problems will arise, and before you know it, you're at odds with your spouse.
Off script here. Something that you talk about is drifting apart. And partly, we kind of had a what do you call it? A naive notion that this is what marriage is. That's just marriage. You just kind of drift. You just do your own thing. And you get together every once in a while, and
Get into your routine.
get in your routine. And some people are so far disconnected they don't realize it. They don't realize how much of a problem that is, and they become enemies, even though they're not like combative. They become enemies because they've drifted way so far apart.
And maybe they do realize it, and maybe they just don't want to make the effort to. That it takes.
And like you think, well, those Joe and Sally, they're the same, and Sue and Tom, they're the same. You look at everybody else, even at our church, Jim and Sue Ellen, they don't look like they're close knit, but they're still together. I guess they're doing okay. You just think drifting apart is just part of marriage. It should not be. Okay, so let me rein it back in.
You'll have to excuse me. I'm getting over sickness.
So, like I said, we are a Christ-centered marriage, and we got in our banner back here. So I got my part about the Christ-centered part. If you're a Christian, if you're not a Christian, first of all, we hope that you come to the point in your life that you accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, and you become a Christian, you become a follower of Jesus. That's what we hope. And all of these things will start to make sense to you, and you will reap the benefits of living a Christian life. You will. So, as a man and woman in the bonds of holy matrimony under God, Christ-centered marriage, we have come to the realization that the marriage model in our lives is what Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22 through 33. And if you've watched our videos, you've heard me say this over and over and over, because it's so important if you get that right. I'm not going to read it. You can read it. I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to summarize it. Bullet points. So, wives, submit to your husbands. And that's in verses 22 through 24. And it's an easy concept if the second part, husband, love your wives like Christ loved the church. He does that. If he's truly loving his wife like Christ loved the church, she's going to reciprocate, and it's going to be a perfect union. That's the oneness.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have that drift, if you have that separation, if you have that isolation, if you have that combativeness, then the husband's not loving his wife like Christ loved the church, and the wife's not submitting. Then third, husband, love your wives as your own body. And I say, love your wife more than you love yourself. Sacrifice for her. Give for her more than you do for yourself. Like Jesus, he was a sacrificial love. It's what you do to your wife. And she'll respond, leave and cleave when a man and woman becomes one flesh. And that's in verse 31. And Paul's quoting Genesis chapter 2, verses 22 through 25, where God tells Adam and Eve, says a man will leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife, and two shall become one. That's a oneness. Then love your wife. Again, Paul starts it and ends it with love your wife, and he tells the wife to respect your husband. So the husband loves his wife first, and the wife responds back with love and respect and submission. That's the key. I'm telling you, that ain't gonna make your marriage like cupcakes and rainbows, but it's going to put it in the right direction.
It'll be better.
And the people that don't follow this, you're going to be just stumbling and fumbling, and it's going to be problem after problem after problem after problem. Isolation. Next thing you know, you're combatives. So, moving on. Why do husbands and wives often become as if they're enemies? So I made a list, and we're going to talk about it. We're going to go back and forth. So, number one, we are selfish by nature. That is the key to everything. It's the key at work. It's the key to people at church, people in social spheres, in families, husbands and wives can be selfish. I want my way. She wants her way. And we're just bucking. I say it's got to be this, and you say it's got to be that, and we just can't get together. And eventually, a husband and a wife can get tired of just the constant back and forth, and then the next thing you know, they're drifting apart because we can't overcome our selfishness and get together and compromise. We want things our way. Our selfish nature tends to show when you're around each other enough, you're going to see the selfish nature come out. You're going to see what they clinging on to, that they won't let go, their demands, and you got to let that stuff go. You can't be selfish in marriage. You got to be selfless. Many times, both the husband and the wife have their own I kind of got 2 points in here. They have unrealistic expectations of each other, which leads to conflict and frustration in marriage. Here, this is going to sound very judgmental, and I don't mean to be, but there's a trend now. It wasn't a trend when we were growing up, and this may be the last 15, 20 years, but there's a trend starting way back when you're teenagers is to date for a long time and be around each other every minute of the day. And you're going to go over to each other's house, and you're going to always be doing something, always together. And it's just fun and games. It's just fun, because there's no responsibility. When you're not married and you're dating and you're together all the time, it's very unrealistic. You can't paint a good picture of, it's glorious. It's just so fun to be with each other all the time. But then you get married, and all that glorious experience turns into reality. So you had coming into marriage, some people have an unrealistic expectation of what marriage is really about. And they're unable to change the unrealistic expectation into practicality. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You have anything to add to that?
I don't think so. In our situation, we're a blended family, so I think that also applies there because, and we've talked about in other videos, where you're coming from broken, either one of you or both of you are coming from a broken marriage before, and you think, oh, well, all my problems are in the past, and we're going to get married, everything's going to be wonderful, and then you still have those same problems, and you bring them into a new marriage, and then you're trying to work through those. So I think it applies to both of those situations.
So whenever you don't meet my needs, and you are not the dream spouse that I wanted, and my unrealistic expectation wasn't met in you, that kind of causes us to be enemies. It could.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you got the next point.
Poor communication skills. So not having intentional quality conversations, which in one of our other videos we talked about, you have surface level conversations like, what are we going to have for dinner tonight? Who's got what schedule going on? Which are things that need to be talked about. But if that's all you ever talk about, then you don't ever get into the deeper things about your relationship and maybe things you're struggling with or just whatever. So always have those quality conversations, not just those surface level conversations. And a lot of people just don't do that. Avoiding conflict, that could be a good thing or a bad thing. If there's a conflict that needs to be resolved and you want to avoid talking about it, that's bad. Or just, maybe you're in conflict all the time. Speaking negatively towards each other often and speaking negatively towards each other in public. That one is a pet peeve of mine. I've talked about it before. And we've seen it in our own circles that we've
social circles. Yeah,
we'll just say that.
We'll just say that.
I don't need to talk negatively. I can't get that word out. Negatively to him, or just being spiteful or mean or whatever because I'm mad. Or you're out. I'm out with my girlfriends and I'm like, well, just Joey did this and Joey did that, and he's just terrible at this, and or get on Facebook and can you believe my husband did this and blah blah blah. And those things can create big problems.
And it makes people think, boy, it sounds like they're enemies.
Mm-hmm. So all these things, just like you said, can make us feel like your marriage, you're an enemy in your marriage instead of being oneness.
Yeah. And it's kind of, and the next point, it's kind of like what I said before, but I think a lot of people have the wrong concept of marriage. And you know where we get that? We get the wrong concept of marriage from society around us, television, the world, magazines, books, movies, now the internet and social media. But you know where we don't get the right concept of marriage at? Do I need to say this?
Might as well.
Churches. It's sad. The churches kind of tiptoe around it. They tell you, they talk about it for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to see that preacher that preaches like 6 months on marriage. Just Jesus going to preach Sunday after Sunday after Sunday on marriage. I'm going to listen to that guy. You don't. You hear like a short. So we learn about marriage from the world around us. It's sad, but that is. So we have the wrong concept of marriage. We don't hold to the biblical concept of leaving and cleaving. And some people, like the Ryan and Selena was saying in one of their recent episodes, some people have they're still holding on to their parents,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna you can't believe what that wife of mine's doing, and the next thing you know, my mother is calling you, complaining to you about not treating me right, and
Mm-hmm.
you got and if you're not holding on to the principles in the Bible, especially like Ephesians 5, if you're not holding on to those principles, and First Peter has some good principles, love your wife as the weaker vessel. You know, lead your wife spiritually, all them things. If you don't do that, you have the wrong concept of marriage. Having the attitude that we can just end the marriage. No, you listen. I am not against um, sticking in marriage to the bitter end. If there's constant abuse or constant adultery, if there's constant unrepentant um, abuse and affairs that just won't end, the other spouse, look, I'm not saying you got to continue in a marriage that is beating you down, but if you need to try to reconcile your marriage, and if not every marriage can be reconciled, but we live in a time of no fault divorce. Well, if you read um, the history of the Jews during the time of Jesus, they kind of had the same attitudes. Where Jesus says that you've heard that it said to you, and it's Matthew chapter 5. You've heard it said to you that you can divorce your wife. He's saying what he's doing is he's talking about how the religious leaders, as long as they had that paper saying, well, my wife doesn't cook me the right meal, I'm going to divorce her. In their mind, that was legal. But Jesus was saying, you're trying to divorce your wife for every reason except for what is permissible by the law. And law of Moses, well, they actually stoned adulterers. So if you committed adultery in marriage, they were stoned in the law of Moses. But it wasn't you can divorce your wife or divorce your husband if they didn't clean the house,
Mm-hmm.
or they don't take care of my needs, or they just don't do it for me anymore. That gal in the office, I like her better, or that guy down the street, I like him better. People, they don't have the right concept, and back to the whole TV thing. It's like every romance show you see, it's the single woman with the kids and looking for another man because the man she had before wasn't any good. So we don't have the right concept of marriage around us. Okay, next point.
Harboring anger, resentment, and unforgiveness, unwilling to let issues go, unwilling to resolve conflicts, unwilling to see things the other person's way, unwilling to compromise, and unwilling to work together. So you have to be willing to forgive. You have to be willing to work things out, talk it out, resolve it. And then once you've done that and you've forgiven, then you got to let it go. You can't keep bringing it back up, bringing it back up, bringing it back up.
Or if you do, you will be enemies.
Mhm.
And that's the kind of stuff that makes husbands and wives enemies. And getting back to the point where she was saying speaking negatively towards each other. And I'm telling you what, we've seen some people in our circles. They'll tell you every bad thing about their husband or everything bad thing about their wife. And I'm thinking, Lord have mercy. I hate to see how they are around each other at home. Yeah, I know more bad stuff about his wife than I want to know. You know, enemies.
Yep.
Don't do that. All right, and the next point, the external forces in our life that causes conflicts in marriage is like friends. Sometimes guys have a lot of social friends that they spend more time with than their wife, and there may be wives too. You have your friends that you spend more time with. That causes conflict. Because I'm not saying you shouldn't do anything with other people. I'm not saying that at all. I just don't have a big social network. I'm just not that type. I'd rather be with her. But if I go out with somebody every once in a while, I guess that'd be okay. But
Mhm.
it all depends on what your every once in a while is. Is it every once in a while, every other day, or
Every weekend.
yeah. And you don't want to get to where you are closer to your friends or your hobbies
Mhm.
or your job. Man, in my time in the military, I've heard a lot of people say, well, I don't mind staying late, or I come in early because I just can't stand to be around my wife. Like, I'm gonna tell you, buddy, I hate that for you. But the external things in life, it could be addictions or other things that bad influences causes conflict. Those things can cause you to be enemies. You need to, you know, deal with that. All right. And the last thing that could cause you to be enemies, and I'll let Lord, she's good at talking about this.
Just lack of oneness in your marriage. So if you aren't intentionally working towards oneness, you're going to be drifting apart. And so, oneness isn't doing the same things and liking the same things. And
Yeah.
oneness is, the marriage conference talked about you build your relationship with God, you and God, and then you build your relationship with each other, and that leads to oneness. It talks about a triangle and how God is here and we're here, and then as we build a relationship with God, we become one with each other too. So, got to work on that oneness. Drawing the picture.
Yeah, I'm gonna draw this so they can see it. So kind of like that. Where you got God at the top, husband and wife, and as you go closer to that oneness, the husband and wife, as you grow closer to God, you grow closer to each other.
And there you have your oneness.
And you have your oneness. Those are the I never heard of that before till we went to the marriage conference, and I think I hear Ryan and Selena say that too. So these things sound like a lot, and it sounds like, man, all those things, the being selfish, poor communication, having the wrong concept of marriage, harboring anger and unforgiveness, and the external forces in our life, man, that kind of sounds hopeless, but there is hope. So there are some things you can do to escape the feeling that you and your spouse are enemies. So, number one, what's the first thing you should do to escape this?
Recognize that your spouse is not your enemy.
When we went to that marriage conference, I'm not saying that we had all these problems, but we can probably, every one of these points, except for maybe the external forces. I don't think we had a lot of external forces hurting us, but we were
Other than
harboring
maybe just busyness.
busyness. Yeah,
yeah.
busyness. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. But there wasn't. I could see ourselves in every one of these points.
We're definitely drifting towards isolation.
We were, and we didn't know the concept of oneness, and we never heard the term "your spouse is not your enemy." And hearing that for the first time, I'm thinking, "That's right. That's right." Anything else? You got anything else to add to that? No,
I don't think so.
Okay. Husbands take the lead, just like I read or I highlighted in Ephesians chapter 5. If you haven't read that, especially husbands, go back and read Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22 through 33. And you're going to recognize, you're going to think, husband's got to take the lead. You are the leader. And hey, look, I know the feminists don't like that. I don't mean no man telling me what to do, but most women want a good man to take the lead. God intends for you to be the head of the marriage, just like Christ is the head of the church. You're under the headship of Christ, so you're the head of the marriage. You're the head of the marriage, and you're to take the lead, and she's going to follow you. But you got to do it the Christ-like way. I'm not saying beat her down and you better do this. I'm the boss, so you're going to do what I say. It's not Christ-like. It's not Christ-like.
No.
It's not. Take the lead in humility by demonstrating a selfless attitude towards your wife. Let your wife know that you are interested in her well-being and her needs and her feelings and even her wants and desires. You got to put some things away. You got to put your dreams and aspirations to the side and focus on her. And she may say, hey, you can pursue your dreams too, because she sees that you're focusing on her. But if you're not focusing on her, you're chasing your own dreams, she's going to resent that. She's going to say, what about me? He's not taking care of me. But if she sees you focusing on her first, she's going to push you to pursue a little time for yourself. And husbands, take the lead in forgiveness. If you want her to forgive you, you got to forgive her. You got to be the one to say you're sorry. If you want her to say you're sorry, you just can't be going, you messed. You say, well, I messed up. And control your anger. And let her know that you want to resolve conflict. You want to do everything you can to resolve conflict. And she'll want to do the same. All these things are easy, but they're hard. They're easy, but they're hard.
They're simple. But
Yep. And husbands, take the lead in eliminating the external forces. So you see what I'm doing here? I'm highlighting all the points. And I'm not saying she's got to do it. You got to do it. I mean, we both got to do it, but husband's got to go first. The headship. Take the lead in eliminating the external forces. Whatever it is in your life that's causing the pressure from the outside. You know what? Maybe I'm working too much. Maybe I got too many hobbies. You spend too much time in the garage or out on the boat or out on the golf course or helping somebody else, Sometimes you got to say, I got stuff to do today. I can't help you today. I'm kind of getting off track here, but you hear the stories of people that want to help everybody else, but they don't want to help their own family. But anyways, we won't go there. When you see your wife, when your wife sees that you, as the husband, are taking the lead in these things, she's going to feel safe. She's going to feel secure. She's going to feel loved, and she's going to want to reciprocate. She's going to follow your lead. Okay. Lori finishes out.
Following the biblical example of marriage, being Christ-centered in your marriage will lead to oneness in your marriage. Just as we discussed earlier, the wife will submit to a husband that demonstrates he loves her and makes sacrifices for her and cares for her needs. And I will say, just from experience, after we went to that first marriage conference, I noticed a big difference in him first, doing things just like he's talking about here. And he's never been one to just, be out with friends all the time and that kind of thing. But we recognized that we were too busy with things at church, and but he was the first one to what you call pursue me after we got back from the marriage conference. He was the first one to make those changes when I saw him making the changes, and then I followed. So
I was bad.
He did exactly what he's telling you to do.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And a lot of these things, they're new to us. And we were married 12 and a half years the first time. We're going on 14 years now. And the couple of phrases that we caught, the oneness, the whole pursuing each other, and the your spouse is not your enemy. And one more phrase, and then we'll finish on this, is we didn't know or we didn't know.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to give you some tips and some advice and give you some things that'll help you that you didn't know before. And you might be like us. You might be married 10, 15, 20 years, or you might be married 1 year. And you're thinking, this is hard. Well, it took us 12 and a half years to realize that we weren't doing everything right. We weren't terrible. We were committed, but we just didn't know how to be committed.
There's more to it being married than what we
Yeah,
knew. So,
yeah.
because we never heard it talk before.
That's right.
So.
That's right. Okay. Next episode, we're going to go back to the blended family, and she's going to speak on the role of a biological mother in the blended family. So I look forward to that, and she's going to do a great job. And so thank you, and like and subscribe, and tell others about us, and
Share our videos.
share this video. And God bless.